And so just to give everybody some background in case you haven't been sort of researching the history of the Dormont zoning code or you didn't know, some maybe fun facts, but then also some background in terms of what we're hoping to accomplish and where we are as we started this project. And so the last code update was actually back in 1995. And as you know, the world has changed quite a bit since that time. And so one of the goals of this project is really to update and modernize the code so that it is no longer a 1995 code, but it is a modern code that really advances and serves the borough. And so when we work on a new code project, one of the first things we do is we actually open up the old code and do a diagnostic. And so, that's not so different than if you had a 1995 sedan and you brought it into the shop and you said, hey, take a look at this, do a diagnostic on this old car and tell me what I need to do to sort of bring it up to speed and, so that it's working and, firing on all cylinders. Same thing with the Dormont zoning code. First thing we did was take a look at what we had. And then we also looked at, what the borough's recent planning goals have been. What kind of buildings have people said they want to see in the city or in the borough? What kind of transportation options do people want to have? How do they want the streets to look? Really, what is the vision that everyone has been planning for, but hasn't necessarily been implemented in the zoning code? And so when we did that project, what we did was we actually scored your existing zoning code as to whether it had a negative impact on your planning vision, a neutral impact on your planning vision, or a positive impact on your planning vision. And not surprisingly, when we did that exercise, we found that the code needed a lot of work. But that's good news for everybody because it sort of helps us to start sort of from square one and really look at each provision that we write in the code and determine whether or not it really advances that vision that the borough is looking for. And so you see at the bottom there, the new code must align with the vision that the borough has, for the future in terms of planning and development. And so right now there are certainly some disconnects between, what the current code does and what everyone else is planning for. And so we hope or we plan that at the end of this code project, you'll have a code that's much more consistent with some of the great planning that's been going on over the last couple decades or several decades in the borough. And so kind of zoning code 101 for anyone out there who's not necessarily a zoning nerd and just doesn't really even know what a zoning code is, which probably would be a fair question to have. What is a zoning code and what does it do? And so a zoning code, really the purpose of a zoning code is to regulate land use in a borough. And the idea is that the reason we regulate land use is to control for public health, safety, and welfare of the residents in the area. And so the first zoning codes really, started in New York City, and they had to do with sort of keeping residents away from things like vermin and industrial manufacturing areas, keeping residential areas away from coal mines, all of these kinds of things, that could create disturbances. And so, really on a very basic level, the original zoning codes were just about separating uses. As zoning has sort of emerged over the decades, it's increasingly regulated the form and placement of buildings. It's regulated the location of uses by district or building type. And it's really been, again, a mechanism for separating what we kind of refer to as bad uses or undesirable uses, right? So you don't want an automotive plant in the middle of your residential neighborhood typically. And so zoning has been the tool to keep those things apart. I think sometimes in addition to knowing, what a zoning code does and what its purpose is, it's also helpful to know, what it doesn't do and understand sort of the limits of what a zoning code can regulate. And so a zoning code isn't sort of a set of municipal traffic regulations. So you're not going to find speed limits in your zoning code You're not going to typically find, the direction of traffic or traffic flow regulations in your zoning code. Your zoning code is really going to be focused on the built environment and everything that's happening around the street. So you can certainly do things to, make the sidewalks and pedestrian areas more, pedestrian friendly and multimodal, but that's not going to be the core purpose of a zoning code in itself. The other thing that a zoning code doesn't do is, typically regulate public nuisances or property maintenance issues. While you can maybe indirectly address those things through getting desirable development types and, engaging people and activating areas through new uses and things like that, a zoning code in and of itself is not a nuisance code or a property maintenance code. So it's not going to be where you go to sort of control for things like high weeds or automobiles that are in disrepair and things like that. You typically look to another code for those kinds of things. And again, a zoning code is going to focus on the built environment. The other thing a zoning code doesn't really or necessarily do is, make the market, meaning you're going to have a zoning code where people can build different types of buildings or introduce different types of uses in districts, and that certainly can help to with economic development and spur economic development. Certainly a tool to accomplish those things. But a zoning code, isn't going to be sort of a magic wand to bring people to a new store just because they got their zoning permit necessarily. Probably, as you all know, as you take part in this this event tonight, those kinds of things are left up to the people and really, people who are engaging community and bringing people together in settings like tonight. You can have whatever use you want assigned to a building, but until you have that community engagement and sort of that pedestrian mindset, you're not really going to accomplish those things. And so a zoning code also finally does not regulate the means of construction. So in other words, it's not a building code. It's not going to tell you necessarily what kind of materials to use as you construct a new building. It's not going to sort of address things like firewalls and the thickness of walls. Again, that's going to be a building code. So what is it? It is a mechanism for sort of assigning uses to different districts and addressing building placement. What it isn't is, a traffic control mechanism or a nuisance code. So now you are all zoning experts. Congratulations. You are ready for the zoning quiz that we will conclude the evening with. Just as a little more zoning background, you may, depending on how familiar you are with this sort of area of, municipal law, you may have heard of this idea of a form-based code. And really the code that we're working on for the borough is very much in that spirit of this concept of a form-based code. And really, it doesn't need to be too complicated. The sort of description of what it is all in the name, right? Form-based. And so while traditionally, again, zoning codes have focused on uses and been very use-based, right? You can put a fast food restaurant here, or you can put a bowling alley here, or you can put a movie theater here. Again, it's all very much based on starting with the use and deciding where you want to put it within an area. A form-based code is more focused on what are our buildings going to look like? What is the built environment going to look like? How far is the front of that building going to be away from the street? Does the front of the building need to be, transparent? If so, what percentage of transparency will it have? We're very much focused on getting a really beautiful building in place. And then once we have that nice building in place, having different uses, go in there, that of course are desirable to the borough, but we're not as concerned about them as we are about sort of the appearance of the building and getting that wonderful built environment in place. And that really goes to this concept of encouraging the character and maintaining the character of the surrounding environment. So that's a goal of our code, our form-based code that we're working on here. The borough is largely built out. There's not a lot of undeveloped land in the area. And so because there's this wonderful character, we want to make sure that any new buildings as they come online, are not sort of in a suburban style, one size fits all mode, but they actually match and advance some of the character that's accumulated over the decades in the area. And so just as a final point, our code, as we looked at Dormont and we thought, really about how it's put together, very uniquely, we thought that really we can classify the different building forms that we put together by street type. So in Dormont, we have some residential streets, we have some commercial streets, and we have some streets where we might have some transit-oriented development. It's not really that complicated, but the idea is that based on which kind of street we're working with, you're going to see some different building forms. And that's really what the next part of my presentation addresses. And just so for everybody can see, this is a quick snapshot of what our new code will look like. Old codes typically didn't have these graphics. If you look in your new code, you wouldn't have graphics of this level of detail. It shows you how buildings will be set up. You're able to look at one page, and if you're a property owner, you can look and you can see how large can my lot be, where does my building need to be located, what uses can go in that building, what design features do I need to take in consideration. You're going to get all of those things on one page, whereas traditionally, the traditional codes, had a number of cross references, and you may have had to jump back and forth between any number of pages to figure out all of those elements of your new development. And so real quickly, we'd like to run through some of the engagement that our partners Yard and Company have done primarily as this zoning code project has taken off. And so the code Dormont engagement, this is August and September of 2020, and we connected with over 1,000 Dormonsters. And so there are a number of activities that maybe many of you have already participated in through this engagement. And that included Make Dormont Legal Again quiz, chalk walk, walk and tell, survey, and presentation. So I'm just going to run through each of those real quick. So if you didn't partake, you can get an idea of what we did. And just as sort of a preliminary concept here, obviously engagement is hugely important part of a zoning code rewrite because while we have some planning documents and we have an idea of what people want to see take place in the borough, as we're writing, we also need to be engaging so we can get that constant feedback. And the regulations that actually show up in what we might think of as sort of the boring code are actually, inspired by the people who take part in these engagement activities. And so the first activity that we have here is the Code Dormont Chalk Walk. And the idea here was to create an interactive survey located in Dormont and Hillsdale Parks. And the idea, is bring together these concepts of parks, historic buildings, walkability, multiple transit options. And these were some of the takeaways from this engagement that we did through the chalk walk. These are the things that are important to the members of the community. And as we're drafting our new zoning code, things that we need to be accounting for to make sure that this code encourages this type of development. And this is the walk and tell activity. And again, the idea here was simply to get a notebook and for residents to begin to sort of memorialize how they interact with Dormont. Walk and tell boxes, including field notes, a booklet, sticky note questions, and chalk. We mailed these out to 50 residents, and we just had them, sort of share their experience, as they went about the borough and gave some ideas of, this would look nice here, this would look nice there. And it doesn't always have to be what we call sort of the grand slam project. I think often in community development, we maybe think about the once in a decade or every 2 decade development projects that are certainly nice to have, those home run projects. But the idea here is that through these field notes, maybe we can identify some singles and doubles along the way as well. A little new paint here, allowing this use here, maybe allowing a mural there. Those little singles add up over time and really can promote sort of the interactive engagement that is really the goal of our code and of course this project as well. And so our friends at Yard did a fantastic job with this. And so there have also been 2 drive-in presentations held in the parking lot of the Dormont pool. And so the project introduction was followed by the Field of Dreams, and you are partaking right now in number 2. So congratulations, here you are. Thanks for joining us. And the Black Panther is up next. And so another engagement activity that we did was a quiz and survey that just tested your knowledge of the Dormont zoning code. You know, it's 25 years old, and the test was essentially, is this building legal? And we found that often, you know, you may have some historic buildings, as the one pictured right here, that's beautiful, you know, right on transit there, 3 stories, very unique, but actually under your current zoning code, this building would be illegal. And so, you know, by giving that survey, you know, we hoped, or the plan was to sort of build awareness that, you know, there's a disconnect right now between, you know, what you want to accomplish or even what has been accomplished over time in the borough and what you're hoping to accomplish with the new code. And so these were some of the themes that we've taken from the engagement that we've done so far. And I'll run through these really quick. People are looking for a code for everyone. Okay, and the idea there is the most common need expressed for the new zoning code is user friendliness and a little flexibility. And so if you sort of flash back to that page I showed you, that layout of the zoning code, you know, the idea is, again, sort of that one-stop shop of one page that's going to tell you everything you need to know about your property and also illustrate it and how it lays out on the street as well. And so 34% of our survey respondents said we need more flexibility and innovation. You know, you need to make the process clear and consistent, and you need, you know, a search button for more intuitive sort of navigation of the code. And so, you know, these are certainly, this is very helpful data for us to take into account, you know, as we draft this code, you know, try to build in that flexibility and innovation. And so, you know, another theme that we had was love thy neighborhood. You know, residents love the small town feel and the local business districts, right? They want to keep Dormont vibrant. And we saw this in our diagnostic report as well. You know, small business is very important. Commercial districts are important here. And so, you know, often with zoning, we have, you know, what we think of as the carrots and the sticks, right? And so you may have something like a small business grant to incentivize a business, but your zoning code needs to actually allow that innovative business to locate in your business district. And so sometimes what we see is there may be a business district that doesn't allow something like a makerspace. And you know, you don't allow some of that small batch manufacturing in a business district. And maybe that's desirable to the residents. So simple sort of improvement we can make through the coding process is to allow that use in the business district. And then we can follow up with the carrot that in the form of small business grants and things like that. So zoning really can work hand in hand with a lot of economic development incentives and be a tool to accomplish many of those goals. And you'll see the last point here again, vibrancy. People don't want to feel like they're in an alienated suburb. And the point being, if that's sort of the goal for, you know, people don't want to feel that way, then we shouldn't be promoting suburban style buildings through the zoning code, which can be the case now with the borough's current code. And put your best foot forward. You know, everybody loves the town's walkability, pedestrian access, you know, and they want to give more to the street. And so people want to focus on pedestrian infrastructure. They'd like to see more wayfinding signage, more landscaping and public art, just in general, more trees. And so zoning can help to advance many of those things. You know, for instance, the zoning regulations can allow for murals. In some cases, murals are not allowed, you know, in different cities and boroughs and, you know, throughout the communities that we work in. And so the question becomes, how do we allow murals so that we can sort of create some of this vibrancy and promote it through the zoning code? And so I'm going to run through now sort of the code framework. As I had mentioned, we are thinking about Dormont in terms of its streets and sort of categorizing property based on what type of street it's on. And that'll all make sense as I give you some of these visuals and give you some background on some of these concepts. And so our new districts under the zoning code are again going to be based on street type. Okay, are you on a residential alley loaded street, a residential street loaded street, a residential collector street, a transit oriented street, a commercial street, or, are you in a park area? And so this is all going to make more sense. Don't worry, I'm not going to give you the quiz yet. This is all going to make more sense as we go through sort of what this means. And so here's an example of what we think of as the transit-oriented district or street type in the borough. And just some character samples of, what do the buildings look like in this transit-oriented district? So again, we're not as concerned about sort of the uses that are going in those buildings, although clearly these look like residential buildings, as we are about sort of the form of the building and how it relates to the street. And so you see sort of the existing built environment in Dormont there, and then you see a more modern, version of that, that might emerge sort of as part of a new development in the borough. And again, this is not necessarily, this is not to say that the code says build that exact thing right there. That is all part of this engagement process that we need the input from the community to understand if you do have something that looks like that, how do you want it to come together under the new regulations? And so again, just to think a little bit more about this transit-oriented district, obviously we're thinking about some higher residential development in close proximity to some of your transit stops, modernized commercial uses to promote an activated business district, and then recognize that because you're close to all of this public transit, there might be less need for other sort of public infrastructure in the area. And then we move to the commercial district, right? So here we have some of the historic, character images of the commercial district. Some of these buildings as it stands might be illegal under your current zoning code, right? They're beautiful, they are innovative, they're unique, but they might actually be illegal. Right? You cannot build them today. And so we have these character samples as examples of, things that we want to permit in the commercial district. And so again, thinking about commercial district, also thinking about the uses, right? We want mixed use development. Of course, we want small businesses and commercial development, but really, what about upper floor residential? Allowing residential uses in your commercial district allows to sort of give more active street life, 24/7, all at different hours of the day. It gives you a critical mass of residents who can go down and use the new market that you also open in the commercial district. Of course, part of the commercial district in Dormont is going to be preserving the historic commercial character. And then something else, again, that can kind of be a small victory here through this code rewrite process is we found that some of the sign regulations might need to be updated in your commercial districts, just so those small businesses can truly sort of advertise, hey, we're here, and do so in a unique and innovative way. It might not sound real exciting if you're not a small business owner, but sometimes just having great sign regulations are like an economic development incentive to your small shopkeepers who want to sort of advertise that they're here as part of your community. And so this is an example of your residential alley loaded character. And again, you'll see pretty self-explanatory. These homes are alley loaded. There's no front driveway. And so that's one of the districts that we're creating to reflect that character. And again, these are going to be your smaller residential, 1 to 4 dwelling units. These may be row homes, townhomes, or they may be detached single family homes as well. But typically your access is going to be, again, from a rear alley. And you're not going to have new curb cuts on your primary street. And sort of another residential type, we have our street loaded, or your house is with a driveway, to sort of put it informally. In terms of unit count and building types, that's going to be the same as your alley loaded, but here you're introducing, again, this driveway, which is a sort of the main difference in terms of configuration. And then you have your residential collector streets, and here are some character images, right? These are some of your more main thoroughfares as far as residential streets go. So you're going to see some larger buildings. You're going to see more units, residential units, and you may have up to 16 residential dwelling units. You may have a few non-residential uses on your ground floor. So again, think of your neighborhood market, where you can sort of walk within the block and get some food and return to your residence. And so those are really sort of the main districts. They are the main districts that we're looking at as we undertake this code rewrite process. And in addition to those, and getting that visual, some of the other things are maybe less exciting things, but I think things that will make this code more user-friendly is sort of engagement has shown people want to have happen, are some of the things like we're going to update cross references or eliminate them where possible so that people can access information on one page. We're going to be promoting new graphics and visuals to sort of help communicate complex concepts. And we're going to have introductory summary tables to clearly summarize information. And so real quickly, I'm sure everybody's wondering what's next. And here's an idea. Right now, we've been getting, of course, our great input through engagement. We're getting staff input on the actual text that we've begun to put together. We're going to be actually delivering a working draft zoning code that staff can start to work through, working group can really start to get a feel for, and we can start to really calibrate or think about, does this new code really live up to the planning vision and the engagement that we've received? And then once we have a working draft complete, we're going to update that working draft, and we'll have a public review draft, which again, everybody will be able to take a look at, sort of in the public realm, comment on it, think about it, provide feedback. And once that code has really been vetted, both publicly through staff, we'll move forward to the formal adoption process so that you can have a new zoning code on the books in Dormont. And so that is my presentation. Thanks, everybody. I hope that you're still awake for the Black Panther there. And Ben, I don't know if you wanted to open up for questions.
Absolutely. Anyone who has joined us via Zoom has the opportunity to put questions in the Q&A option at the bottom of your page. Let's see. Eamon had his hand raised, and we'll be using the Q&A feature at the bottom if you can type your question in there. Just so everybody knows, although we know Eamon is the head of our planning commission. However, we have had incidents at past meetings of people saying things that should not be said in public meetings or displaying things that should not be displayed, which is why we use this method. And as soon as we get some questions in Q&A, I will send those over. So we have first question. I've lived here about 10 years. When I moved here, you could buy a house for around $100,000. Those same houses are now $300,000. Will the zoning changes help this? So I think it's an affordability question. Can the new code help with the affordability of homes within the community?
Yeah, Ben. So, first, thanks for the question. And, I think as people may know, this is sort of, a very pertinent topic at the moment in planning circles and urban development circles. And the answer is yes. Obviously, to sort of recognize the limits of the zoning code, the zoning code is not going to sort of set home prices, that directly. But what a zoning code can do as we increase unit counts and provide essentially more product on the market, it can, sort of address some affordability issues. I think both from a rental standpoint and also, of course, from a home ownership standpoint, which is the question here. And so we've seen clearly, of course, that Dormont has a lot of single-family home stock. And so, yes, I think through adding unit count, that can be an indirect result of sort of a zoning code.
And next, we have a question. Is there any estimate on how long it will be before the new code is formally adopted?
Yeah, and I think, some of this, I think, is sort of ballpark based on other codes and experiences, but typically, we look at around a year, to final adoption, and so we kicked off, in February, March. I would say sort of, within that 10-month to 12-month time frame, just depending on the adoption process, is pretty typical.
And some of that, just to build on that a little bit, will be based off of public feedback that continues through, any things that the staff or council will want to see changed. But once a code is presented and we feel good about that, then the Planning Commission will have meetings and a hearing about that. Once they approve it, then it will go to council to hold another hearing. Once council approves it, then it still has to go to Allegheny County to get the county's approval before it can actually go into effect. So there's a lengthy bureaucratic process even once the hard work of getting it written is done. But we hope to have this, we think probably next spring. Sound about right? Yeah,
Ben, and you make a great point about, I think we can feel like we have it at the finish line when everybody's happy about it and ready to sort of undertake the bureaucratic process. And so that's sort of one really important finish line. And then obviously sort of in terms of being a legally binding document, getting through the bureaucracy is sort of the second important thing.
The next question is, can a form-based code help encourage racial and cultural diversity in the borough?
Yeah, and again, I think this this question is very consistent with sort of the first question, which is, we obviously aren't going to have a direct line between those two things, but I certainly think, obviously, by sort of engaging community, having residents be a part of the rewrite process, thinking about the community that people want to see, that a zoning code can advance those things, in conjunction with other community development efforts.
I think, from my standpoint, I have spoken about form-based code since early on in my time with Dormont. One of the things that I liked is that it allows for the kinds of buildings that make up Dormont already, but have been made illegal by our current code. One of the best ways to help encourage racial and cultural diversity is to have a wide range of housing available within the community. And right now, those multi-unit buildings are very difficult to have put in the community. And so you lose out on a key housing type. That also helps with the issue of aging in place in the community. For our seniors, it's harder for them to stay in a community, particularly if you go back to the first question where housing prices are rising. It becomes more difficult. So this can encourage diversity in housing, which often helps encourage more people to come to the community and break down those racial and cultural issues. It's getting away from the old Euclidean zoning style that encouraged pure single family housing throughout an entire community. That's primarily what our current code focuses on. So this should help encourage that kind of diversity. So thank you for the question. Next, just a comment. Thank you for the transparent information. Can't wait to see a code that's easier to read and understand and access. And again, form-based code, one of the great things about this is its ease of access for more people. If you're not going to nerd out on zoning, and I see some comments from some people who I think nerd out on zoning a bit like we do, but this is so much easier to understand. The visual formatting should make it much easier for residents. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for being excited about zoning.
Next, we have, what can the new code do to help with regenerating / revitalizing the business districts?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And I think the answer to a lot of these questions is, our code is going to really focus on some of that organic growth and not being so focused on, again, the home run project. And so by sort of activating the business district, allowing for sort of a broader spectrum of uses, allowing residential uses and mixed uses, that is really going to help, again, create that critical mass of residents, workers, and visitors to really revitalize the business district, along with things like, events and murals, sort of those things to sort of build the character of the district as well.
I also think the signage piece is important for that as well.
Yes.
So under Euclidean zoning, which is what we currently have, you cannot regulate style in any way. But with form-based code, you can require a certain form in there so that you can require businesses to have nice signage that fits the character of the district. And that helps quite a bit with just improving the overall look of the business district, and having good businesses near each other helps each of those businesses. Next, how will the code impact street typologies? Will it improve access to the entire community for those not using a vehicle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of impact, I guess to the extent, impact, by impact you mean change, I think the answer is it will not change sort of what the natural street typology is for, the streets in the borough. Meaning we're going to build on sort of, if you think of the streets as the bones, right? They're the skeleton that we're going to sort of hang the zoning code on. And so it won't change the typologies. It'll build on sort of their existing development patterns. And then the concept is that, yes, based on the engagement we've been hearing, right? People want pedestrian-oriented, multimodal development. And so, as we build these typologies, we want to promote buildings that relate to the street in a way, that allow pedestrians to move freely. And so, one example of that is, you're not going to allow new curb cuts, in an area that is alley loaded, right? We want to continue that continuity of the street wall so that people, pedestrians can move freely and sort of unabated by, vehicles.
Okay. Next, with all the modernization of the code, would the new code do anything to help seniors? It's important that it lifts up the entire community. I hit on that a bit. Do you want to expand on that at all, Donnie?
Yeah, Ben, one thought on that, and that was obviously one thing we really keyed in on when we did the diagnostic. Is obviously you have a large population that's aging in place in the traditional single-family detached structures. So I think one thing we can do in the code is allow those structures to be renovated, because in some ways, to the extent a structure is non-conforming and you can't do anything with it, that's not going to allow you to sort of bring it up to speed, for a homeowner who's aging in place and needs to make some changes to make it work better for their living situation.
Next, we have, there are folks living here who do so because they can commute by transit and perhaps own fewer cars per household. How might you make things easier for folks who don't or don't want to drive?
Yeah, so I think, again, as we look specifically at the transit-oriented district and development pattern, one of the things that we can do is sort of code that district, and the commercial district for that matter, in a way that is responsive to the fact that people are using public transit options. And so, as new development comes, it needs to correspond to that transit so that it's easier for people to navigate both getting there and then once they're there, to sort of figure out where they are. And some of that goes to suggestions for things like wayfinding signs and increasing the vibrancy of the commercial district.
And I think that transit-oriented development is a key piece to this, in that most of our, we have two primary T stops. We have a third smaller station. But the two big ones don't necessarily have a lot of housing directly around them. Potomac Station is part of a business district. It sits in the middle of it. However, you have there's some key looks at what transit-oriented developments could look like in Dormont, keeping the same character just down the block with the larger apartment buildings over there. But it stops right at that point. And when you're at Dormont Junction, you have a very large parking lot, car sales, and a church, and only really on two sides do you have housing, and it is primarily single-family housing there. So to help do this, you would transform kind of that parking lot area and part of that commercial area into transit-oriented development to encourage housing there, which would help promote that lifestyle to be able to live without a vehicle. Next, folks complain constantly that there is not enough parking. Many people want to add parking spots on their property, but that increases stormwater runoff, leading to flooding. Will the new code impact these issues, perhaps by allowing or incentivizing novel solutions like permeable pavers, et cetera?
Yeah, so, and Ben, I know, feel free to weigh in here as well, but I know that as we sort of nerded out on the zoning code, some of the regulations we looked really specifically at were sort of the stormwater regulations for new development and sort of incentivizing and being innovative in the way that we accounted for runoff, and allowed for some of the unique solutions this person is referring
to. Yeah. This is kind of that double-edged sword that can be difficult to try to tackle. And so one of the things that we've looked at is handling the stormwater issues through the code by allowing those different types of approaches to come in on larger properties where you might have somebody wanting to put in a different type of patio even. We're still looking at ways that would allow them to do so if they can show that they are putting in mitigating technologies or modern stormwater management techniques that can keep that water from moving into the public system. And so the more extreme they want to go with their property, they would still have the option to do so, but it will require a little more work and effort on their part to show that they are not putting out any more water into the public system than they would have before. And however, trying to make it as easy as possible for things like the parking pads in the community. So some simple options for people, but also looking at some of the more complex things for people who are working on bigger projects. Next, is it possible that the new code could encourage use of garages and or allow building off-street parking that we may not be able to do with the current code? So I think some of that was addressed with that stormwater related question. And I'll take a little bit of this, Donnie, if you want to add more in, please do.
Yeah, and so I'm wondering if some of this goes to this concept of accessory dwelling units as well,
yes,
which
exactly.
We're looking at in the residential districts. And so, yeah, so the answer is yes. I mean, I think the code is looking at sort of that adaptive reuse is what we refer to it as in the zoning world, essentially, using something like a garage, for an accessory use on your residential property.
And so I wonder, it's possible that some people could see that as, okay, so you're just going to reuse the existing garage and you're just going to add more people and more vehicles. But one of the things that this will encourage is for people to take down those older garages because they'll be allowed to build a new garage with potential accessory unit above it. and they can have a nicer structure on site that is more usable, but also allows for kind of new income possible for that property. And this is another one of those items that we hope will also help seniors in the community. If they are looking to age in place, they could help supplement that income through an ADU, or move into the ADU itself and rent out the house that they used to live in. So it's a way to stay on their property while being able to afford a community whose prices have been rising consistently. Next, we have development impact taxes in the future. Would you expect the new code to be tax base neutral or to see an increase or decrease in future tax base? And so I can address this some in that, this certainly would encourage development of the Dormont Junction site. As many people know, we worked with the Port Authority a year or so ago on the plan for developing that site cooperatively. With that, you would have a number of new commercial spaces, office spaces, but a lot of apartments in there as well. So when you're taking what is essentially a tax-free property, it's a government-owned property, and turning it over into private use, which would help the taxes throughout the community, but you're also adding, anywhere 50 to 100 new workers into the community, which will also add to the earned income tax base there. So this certainly could help the tax base within the community. So it should, over time, ease the burden on existing residents. Next, this goes back to the affordability question. Are there any creative solutions for homeowners that want to remain in the community but may want to use their lot beyond just a single housing unit? And I believe we've covered that through the discussion about the ADUs on the property. There anything else you wanted to say to that point, Donnie?
I don't. I mean, I'm glad that we got to that. So. Yeah.
Next, we have great ideas and presentation. If the new code puts existing buildings into non-conformance, what is the course of action to encourage replacement of buildings to more modern? And start from the legal side of things. Once a new code goes into effect, the existing structures that do not automatically comply would be grandfathered in. And then only if they change use would they be required to start to conform with the new code. However, one of the big intents of this rewrite is to make the things that exist in Dormont, the things that have made Dormont what it is today, legal. To go back in time with a future code and take the things that everybody has loved about our community and make those things legal again. At one point Donnie mentioned, the potential for some type of commercial units on some of the collector streets. And the idea is, to at least have the option for corner restaurants, et cetera, some things that used to exist within the community, things that would be easy for the neighborhood to walk to, that won't have a big traffic impact, but could still bring back the community feel to the area. There are a set of buildings that always come to mind for this along Dell Avenue, right by the T tracks, that are clearly former commercial units, but this code forced them into housing. And so they're these really strange looking apartments that would have been a great little neighborhood commercial district. Don, do you have anything further to add on that, on non-conformance and making them modern?
One thought is certainly that, I think again, we don't, I think the reaction is maybe to think that we have to sort of scrape any non-conforming building from the ground. And an interesting approach that we're seeing in a lot of communities is sort of looking at adaptive reuse of what might otherwise be undesirable buildings. So if you have an outmoded gas station, for instance, that someone wants to make into sort of an outdoor diner, with sort of a restaurant space as well, allow that non-conforming building to remain standing, but actually use it for another purpose and dress up that gas station so that it can be adaptively reused for a new purpose. So, I think on one end of the spectrum, that's an approach other than just sort of scraping it from the
Right, and the last one that we have is parking. How will this be addressed with the new code? Nope, sorry, we just had another one come in, so not the last one. But parking, how is parking addressed in the new code?
Yeah, so I think one of sort of the state of the art approaches to parking is really to look at parking sort of a demand-based approach in terms of looking at proximity to things like public transit, on-street parking, public parking garages, sort of what is the overall parking supply for an area, and then determining parking need sort of on a building by building basis. Whereas, in the past, I think the approach has been, or I know the approach in the suburban code has been more to look first at the use and say, you have X number of square feet, you need X number of parking spaces, without reference to anything that's around the actual building. So that's just sort of, I would say, in terms of addressing parking, I think the new starting point is to sort of do that inventory and work in that direction, as opposed to starting from the use and going out.
Okay, and now what looks to be the final question is, stormwater absorption on small lots can sometimes negatively impact a neighbor, especially if close by and downhill. Would such strategies need to be developed or reviewed by an engineer, or would you plan to have an approved kit of parts or set of rules / required distances in the code? And Donnie, I don't know if you've been part of these conversations on this, but I know, from my conversations with everybody on this, for those larger types of projects that I talked about, you would have to have a study performed on your property to show and to be able to prove that you are not displacing any more water from your property than you previously had. So that's based on right now, Dormont has a 45% lot coverage requirement. So if you're going to go over that, you have to have an engineer show that the mitigation efforts that you're taking would not put more water into the public system than under the current circumstances.
Yep.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Donnie?
No, I think that covers it. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So last opportunity. Anybody want to ask one more question before the movie gets started? Now, just to make sure everybody's clear, you cannot watch the movie on Zoom. That would be illegal of us. But there is still space down at the park for anyone who wants to drive down and see Black Panther. Doesn't look like we have any more questions. So thank you everybody who joined us. We got a nice little Zoom crowd on here. And we just had a thank you. Appreciate your hard work on this big project delivered. So thank you, Liz. We really appreciate that. Several thank yous coming in. But I also really want to thank Donnie and Joe for joining us and all of their hard work on this. They've been great to work with. Any parting words, guys?
Yeah, we appreciate everybody's interest, and we look forward to getting this to the finish line. So thank you very much.
I kept trying to find a way to chime in, but you guys just do such a good job answering the questions. I was just sitting back in the dark and watching. It's a great meeting.
Okay, so we've had a number of thank yous from our Zoom audience. Thank you all for joining us, and we know that zoning is not the most interesting topic, but glad that you were interested enough to join us tonight and hear about where we're going with this. I think this has a lot of great potential for our community. So I'm excited to get this finished and get it implemented. So again, thank you, Donnie. Thank you, Joe. And thank you,
Thanks,
all of our
Ben.
Door Monsters
Joe.
that joined us. And hope you all have a good night and enjoy the movie.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ben.
everybody.
Take care.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.